whole clique of politics centered around this point, and all the kings and residents of the whole world became involved in this fight between the rival brothers. Lord Krishna was also there on the side of King Yudhishthira. It is said in the Mahabharata, Adi Parva, verse 20, that 640 million men were killed in the 8 days by the battle of Kurukshetra. And some hundreds of thousands were missing. Practically, this was the greatest battle in the world within 5,000 years. This mass killing simply to enthrone Maharaja Yudhishthira was too mortifying. So it tried to be convinced with evidences from histories by great sages like Vyasa and Lord himself that the fight was just because the cause was just. But Maharaja Yudhishthira would not be satisfied even though he was instructed by the greatest personalities of the time. Krishna is designated herein as the performer of superhuman actions, but in this particular instance, neither he nor Vyasa could convince King Yudhishthira. Does it mean that he failed to be a superhuman actor? No, certainly not. The interpretation is that the Lord as Ishvara, or the super soul in the hearts of both King Yudhishthira and Vyasa, performed still more superhuman action because the Lord desired it. As super soul of King Yudhishthira, he did not allow the king to be convinced by the words of Vyasa and others, including himself, because he desired that the king hear instructions from the dying Bhishma Deva, who was another great devotee of the Lord. The Lord wanted that at the last stage of his material existence, the great warrior Bhishma Deva see him personally and see his beloved grandchildren, King Yudhishthira, etc., now situated on the throne, and thus pass away very peacefully. Bhishma Deva was not at all satisfied to fight against the Pandavas, who were his beloved fatherless grandchildren. But the Kshatriyas are also very stern people, and therefore he was obliged to take the side of Duryodhana because he was maintained at the expense of Duryodhana. Besides this, the Lord also desired that King Yudhishthira be pacified by the words of Bhishma Deva, so that the world could see that Bhishma Deva excelled all in knowledge, including the Lord himself. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Itinamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyabadi Pasyat Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Sivasati Gauravaktarunda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. King Yudhishthira, who was much aggrieved, could not be convinced despite instructions by great sages headed by Vyasa and Lord Krishna himself, the performer of superhuman feats, and despite all historical evidence. So we see here that the Lord is setting the scene for one of the fantastic parts of Mahabharata, where Bhishma instructs Yudhishthira in the presence of Lord Krishna. So we see here, Srila Prabhupada is saying of how it was all a plan of Lord Krishna himself, that the different people involved would behave in this particular way. Sometimes what happens when we see certain situations in their own light, we can get pretty dejected or um, despondent at the situations, right? If you see here, the situation of Bhishma Deva was actually a very tough situation. But the Lord was setting the scene for that to become a source of great fame and so for Yudhishthira, for Bhishma Dev's glories in this world, right? There's once a story of how everything is about interpretation, right? How we interpret our different situations in our lives. So there was once a rabbi, a rabbi is a Jewish priest, right? So the rabbi was delivering a lecture from the Torah. So the Torah is just like, our Bhagavad Gita, right? They spend a lot of time reading from the sacred text. And then he was teaching that to a few young students. And as they were reading this text, they came across a line which said, "The truly evolved person is even he who continues to smile in the midst of the greatest of difficulties." Right? The truly evolved person is he who continues to smile in the midst of the greatest of all difficulties. And the students were, hearing this, and they were thinking, oh wow, how would somebody really smile in the midst of greatest difficulties, right? If you're truly in difficulty, how can we really smile in such conditions? And this rabbi was thinking, oh yeah, it is a difficult thing. I myself might not be able to do it. If I'm really put into a lot of difficulty, will I be able to smile in those situations? Right? He was contemplating and thinking, how would he act? And then he said, but I think there is one person you should go meet, and he can sort of demonstrate to you out of his own practical life. And this was an old person, he was like 72 years old. He lived near the synagogue, the temple. And the rabbi said, all of you go and talk to him and get his perspectives on this. And he gave a little bit of history of who this person was. Right? This person, when he was a child, he was abandoned by his parents. Right? You can imagine, for a small child, what can be more traumatic and difficult than being abandoned by their parents. So he sort of grew up as an orphan, at the mercy of other people. Then, when he became a youth, he had an accident and lost both his legs. Right? Imagine, at least some people, they start out in a difficult way, but later, Kala bestows some relief on them. Right? No, but his life was getting more complicated. He lost both his legs and he was bound to a wheelchair. Right? And he goes on to explain that his whole life was a series of saga of pain and suffering and this and that. It looked like very despondent situation. These people were, oh wow, is there somebody like that? But he said, go talk to him and see what he has to say. So they all, carefully went and found the house of this person, and they were knocking on the door. And he came very briskly in his wheelchair. Right? He came in the wheelchair, and with a big smile on his face, he welcomed them. Oh, you're all students of the synagogue. Come over here. Why are you here? Then they said, oh, we were reading this verse from the Torah. And we are seeing here the verse, that how a evolved person would smile in the midst of difficulties. And we wanted to see a practical demonstration of that. And now that we have seen you, we are surprised that how can you continue to smile and receive us so happily when you're going through so many difficulties your whole life. To that person said, I don't know what you're talking about. I think you've come to the wrong address. Right? I am 72 years old, and my life has been a series of blessings after blessings by the Supreme Lord. Right? I have led a very fulfilling life, and always the Lord has been there for me to rescue me and to help me in my difficult times. And I couldn't have asked for anything more. Right? And this was the attitude of this person who had gone through so much difficulties. Very similar to what Kunti Devi herself is saying, right? Vipadaha santu. She's asking, please give me a lot of difficulties so that I can always be happy that the Lord will come to rescue me in those difficult moments. Right? And if you think about this, similar situation for Bhishma Dev. Bhishma's whole life was a series of difficult times. Right? So many of you would have read from the Mahabharata, right? The great position of Bhishma Dev. He was actually, in the previous life, he was one of the Ashtavasus. So once what happened, the Ashtavasus were visiting Vasishtha along with their wives. And Bhishma was one of the Vasus called Prabhasa. And so what happened, Bhishma Dev was, Prabhasa actually, not Bhishma Dev. Prabhasa was requested by his wife to steal Vasishta's Kamadhenu. So Vasishta had this wonderful Kamadhenu cow that would give anything he wanted. And this wife became very envious of it, and she said, please steal this for me. And she implored him to steal. And Prabhasa, caught in this weak moment, he actually stole Kamadhenu, and Vasishta got very angry. And he cursed them and said, all of you will be born in the material world, in the lower planetary systems, in the earth, and you will suffer a lot. Right? And then they all fell down at the feet of Vasishta and begged forgiveness from him. And so he said, okay, you 7, you were just accomplice to this Prabhasa. So you will be born and you'll immediately die and come back. It's going to be quick for you. But this Prabhasa, he premeditated and stole this cow from me. He's going to suffer a lot. Long life of suffering. But then, it's always said, the curse of the great sages is always a boon or blessing. Right? He knew that Prabhasa was actually at heart he was a really good person. And so he told him, but your life will be a lot of difficulties, but you'll be very famous for your knowledge and skill and your valor. Right? In fact, the word Bhishma means somebody who has a very strict vow. Right? His actual name was Devavrata. So he was born of Shantanu and Mother Ganges. So Mother Ganges, when first 7 children were born, she would immediately take them away and kill them by drowning them in the Ganges water. And Shantanu was like bewildered. Why is a mother doing this? How can a mother kill her own children? And when his 8th son was born, he could not resist, because she had told him, if you stop me and ask me anything, I'll go away. But when this eighth son was born, he could not tolerate the pain in his heart, seeing that he was also going to be killed. And he stopped her. And then Mother Ganges gave Devavrata to Shantanu and she disappeared. Right? So like that, Bhishma Deva's birth itself was quite a interesting episode. Right? And then his whole life story was always one of great austerities and difficulties. When he was a young person, he was a crown prince, and he was very much loved by everybody because he was a Maharati. It is said that he had the strength of 4 Maharathis and could defeat 4 of them at the same time. A Maharati itself is a big thing, and he had the strength to defeat 4 Maharathis at the same time. And so Devavrata was very famous and was beloved by all the inhabitants of his kingdom. He was a crown prince, and everybody was eagerly waiting for him to take the reins of the king and become the ruler. But what happened, again, every stage of Bhishma Dev's life was always tough situations. His father, Shantanu, fell in love with a fisherwoman called Satyavati. And he wanted to marry her. And when he tried to ask for her hand in marriage, the fisherman said, "No way, I'm not going to give my daughter to you." Can you imagine? The ruler of the world is coming and asking for your daughter in marriage, and he's saying, "No, I'm not giving." And he had a very good logic. He said, you already have an elder son, this Devavrata, who is so famous, so much loved by everybody. My daughter will come to your house and she'll be like a servant in the house, because her children have no chance of becoming kings. Right? So what is the use of getting my daughter married to a big king like this? Then she'll just be a maid servant. I'd rather keep her at home. Right? And it is said that Shantanu was so despondent at this situation. And Devavrata could understand that his father seemed very preoccupied and was in a lot of anxiety. So he went and asked him, "Father, what is happening? Why are you like this?" Then he explains that, this is what has happened. And Devavrata says, "Don't worry, I will get, the Satyavati and get her married." And the story goes that he goes to the fisherman and then promises him that, not only I will never go on become the king. I will ensure that Satyavati's children become the kings. But no, the fisherman says, "Okay, I know you are a person of will keep his word. But what about your children? How do I know your children are also going to keep their word?" And this fisherman was very astute. Then he says, the only way, I have no confidence that your children won't. You are so powerful. Your children will be even more powerful than you, and they will take over the throne. What will my daughter's children do? And then he makes a big, vow that he'll remain a celibate brahmachari his whole life, right? And not only that, then this fisherman goes on even more. He says, "Well, it's okay. You said you won't marry. You'll put my children on the throne. But what if all the people revolt and throw my children away and make you the king?" And he is like so caught up in his own world. And then Bhishma Deva promises him that not only will I not marry, not only will I put them on the throne, but I will be there to protect and make sure that your daughter's children will be the rulers of this world. I'll be there forever protecting them. And it is said that when he made this great vow, there was he was blessed with the ability to die at his will, based on this great sacrifice that he made for his father. Right? So we see here Bhishma Dev, even in his youth, he had such a difficult time. And the story goes on, it becomes more and more complicated. His whole life was an example of how people live to principles, rather than looking at the immediate. We call it Shreya and Preya, right? Not the immediate benefit, but the overall long-term benefit. So Bhishma Dev, when he was looking after Satyavati's children, one of his sons was Vichitravirya, and Vichitravirya wanted to marry the daughters of Kashi, Amba, Ambalika, and who's the third one? Ambika. Amba, Ambalika, and Ambika. Right? And so Bhishma Dev, is such a big fighter. He goes and kidnaps them from their Swayamvara ceremony and brings them to be married to Vichitravirya. But there, what happens? Amba, prays to him and says, you kidnapped me like this, but I have given my heart already to the king of Salva. So please don't get me married against my wish to this Vichitravirya. So Bhishma Dev, being a principled person, he said, I might have kidnapped you, but if your heart is already given, I can't go against your wishes. So he takes Amba to the king of Salva to give her, in marriage to him. But this Salva would have fought very valiantly, trying to prevent Bhishma from taking away these three daughters, and he would be defeated. And so he would be in a very, very dejected state, that I have already been defeated by this, and you already taken her away. I can't accept her. And he refuses to accept Amba. And now Amba says, okay, you have put me in this bad situation now. I gave my heart to Salva, and he is refusing to take me. So the only thing left is, you take me, you marry me. Right? And this whole, and she is so adamant. Bhishma says, how can I take you? I have already given a vow that I will not. Then Amba says, you think you can get away this easily from me? I'm going to make you marry me. And then she is very clever. She goes to Parashuram. She goes to Parashuram and asks Parashuram, you should give me shelter. I am I'm a woman who has no shelter right now. You give me shelter at your feet. And Parashuram agrees that I will force Bhishma to marry you. And there's a big fight actually in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra place itself. This battle between Bhishma and Parashuram happens. Long story, but they fought for like 23 days. And obviously, both of them are such great personalities. One would never be defeated, right? And then he's actually given some hint on how to defeat Parashuram, but he refuses to, do things. He said, "That's not against dharma. That's against dharma. I will not apply, ploys to kill Parashuram." And Parashuram becomes very pleased with him, and then he becomes his guru. And he blesses him that, okay, you don't worry, I will tell, Amba that you will not be marrying her. But Amba becomes very upset. I tried, I got the best person, Parashuram, but you defeated Parashuram also by your great qualities. And then she goes to Lord Shiva and worships Lord Shiva, and then gets a blessing that she will be the cause of the death of Bhishma. And she becomes Shikandi. So the whole story goes on. Even when Bhishma Dev was taking care of the Pandavas. Again, very painful situation. Like the fatherless children were put in his care. But he had to stand and look at Dhritarashtra and his sons trouble so much and give so much of pain and suffering to them. And just because he was taken care of by Dhritarashtra, he had to fight on his side, which was very, very painful for him. He actually did not want to do that. And in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he was sort of half-heartedly fighting. And Duryodhana comes to him and says, you got a power of 4 Maharathis. How come you're doing this to me? If you're loyal to me, then you should fight for me without any hesitation. And Bhishma becomes very upset and says, today either Arjuna is going to be killed or what will happen? Huh? Remember the story? What happens? Arjuna will be killed or what? Or Krishna has to break his vow and take up a weapon. See, because if you remember, Krishna has said, I'm going to come to one side, but I'm not going to take up any weapons. You can either have my kingdom, my whole army, or you can have me without any weapons, and I'm not going to fight. So Bhishma Deva says, either Arjuna will be killed, or only person who can save him is Krishna. And Krishna has to break his vow and take up weapons. And you all know there's a very famous painting done by devotees. And Krishna is like, such a beautiful painting. Krishna is getting down and taking the chariot and charging at Bhishma there. And Bhishma is so peacefully just, folding his hands and surrendering to the Lord. Right? So, very glorious situation. But even then, Bhishma is not defeated. Right? The Lord just keeps his, the chariot wheel down. And then the story goes on that it was found out that they go to Bhishma and ask him only, how can we defeat you? Nobody can defeat Bhishma Dev. They go to him one night and say, Krishna also goes and says, please tell us how can we defeat you. Then he gives them a secret. Right? If you bring Shikandi in front of me, right, I will not fight against Shikandi. Because he's the Napunsaka. And so I will not fight against him. And so that's how they actually, but Yudhishthira Maharaj was totally against it, doing things like this. But Krishna somehow convinces that they will put Shikandi in the chariot, and Arjuna will go on to fight. And Bhishma Deva, as promised, when Shikandi is brought in front of him, he just keeps his weapons down and surrenders and says, you can do whatever you want. And that is how Arjuna is actually able to defeat by a ploy which is given by Bhishma himself. That is the glorious nature of Bhishma Dev. And you see here, while this story is going on, right, he was in a very tough situation materially. Arjuna fires so many arrows at him, and it creates a bed of arrows for him to lie down. And Bhishma Dev is in this very tough situation. With his life here just being preserved because, he had been given the boon that he can die at his will. Right? It is in this situation that, this particular sloka is actually happening. Lord Krishna could have easily convinced Yudhishthira. Right? Yudhishthira was so despondent. Can you imagine 640 million people were killed? The population of the United States is like half of it, like 310, 313. Twice the population of the United States was killed in just 18 days. Right? You take all the World War, they're all small in front of all of this. A few million people were killed, and this was a massive, massive war. And Yudhishthira Maharaj was so despondent that, why was all this? Just to put me on the throne, so many people had to die. Is this the right thing to do? And he was very, very dejected. And he was not at all wanting to rule the kingdom. Lord Krishna tried to preach to him, he would not listen. Vyasadeva tried, he wouldn't listen. All the rishis tried, they wouldn't listen. They quoted from all the shastras. See, the reality is that Duryodhana was actually a good king. He was a very good ruler, and the kingdom was actually very happy under him. Not that that he was a tyrant or something and killing people and all that. He only had enmity with the Pandavas, and he would do all kinds of things to try to kill them. And so in that sense, Yudhishthira Maharaj is telling, people were happily living under Duryodhana. Right? Then why just to put me on the throne, so many people had to die, so many women had to become widows, unprotected, and they would all be Varna Sankara and all those things. So he's very dejected by the outcome of Mahabharat war. And it is this situation, Lord Krishna, to glorify the great, his great devotee, Bhishma Dev. Right? Bhishma, we all know, is one of the 12 Mahajanas. Right? Out of all the historical personalities in this material universe, the 12 of them are considered as the greatest devotees of all time. And Bhishma is one of them. Right? Yamaraj is one of them. So like that, Lord Krishna, arranges this situation where Yudhishthira Maharaj is not convinced at all by words, and he has to go to Bhishma Dev to be preached and get convinced that this is just a creation of the Lord. The Lord wanted this to happen, and so we all have to follow the Lord's instructions. And the famous verses of Bhishma's prayers are considered one of the pivotal parts of Mahabharata, just like the Gita. On a very similar level, Bhishma's instructions are put on an equal level of the Gita itself. And we'll see in the later verses how Bhishma Dev gives wonderful instructions to them. And if you see here, devotees, how they deal with different situations in their life. If you look at it from a material perspective, what a difficult life Bhishma Dev lived. Right from his childhood all the way up to his death, it seems like he's always in so much of pain and suffering, and it looks like his life was meant to be full of austerities and sufferings. But Bhishma Dev was never thinking like that. He was always thinking, oh wow, what a wonderful life I have led. The Lord has so mercifully, when I'm on my deathbed, the Lord has come to see me. He was so pleased, right? That not only the Lord has come to see me, but how happy I am that my dear grandchildren, Yudhishthira Maharaj and all the Pandavas, have been crowned as kings. Rightfully so. Because that's what he wanted to do his whole life. His whole life he wanted to put them on the throne so that the world can be ruled with righteousness. So we see here that in life we put in different situations. It's how we look at it, how we interpret, and the perspective we have in life is what makes all the difference. Right? What is considered as painful or suffering, what is considered as very glorious and glorious and cause of great joy. So Bhishma Dev, after he gave a preach to them, right, it is said that he actually healed all his wounds and was lying in wait for Uttarayana to come. For 58 days after that, he lies down and waits for the most auspicious moment. Right? Dakshinayana and Uttarayana. The night is Dakshinayana and Uttarayana is the daytime of the demigods. And at the right, very auspicious moment, he passes away from this world. And we see how Bhishma's whole life was an example for all of us, and how we should take everything that happens as the blessings of the Lord. There's always a silver lining. There is a way to look at things in a very spiritual perspective, in a very um, pragmatic perspective of the Shastras, and that can be a source of great happiness and satisfaction for us devotees. So we see here in this verse, Prabhupada is talking about how in the purport Lord Krishna is setting the stage for these big instructions by Bhishmadev. So we'll stop here. Anybody's any quick questions or comments? Okay. ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय शिल प्रभुपाद की बोल प्रेमानंदे।